Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Item 7 is a public hearing on spending control limits that the Montgomery County Council and Prince George's County Councils must set for the FY23 budget of the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission. The process requires that the council set annual ceilings for WSSC's proposed FY23 budget with regard to new debt service, water and sewer operating expenses, and the maximum average rate increase. A T&E committee work session will be scheduled at a future date. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the council's consideration should do so by the end of business on October 5th. We have one speaker for this hearing. Ms. Kennedy, can you please call on Mr. Bren?
Yes, good afternoon. The first speaker and only speaker for this public hearing is Gordon Bren. Mr. Bren, you have 2 minutes for your testimony and you may begin as soon as you're ready.
Thank you. Hi, this is Gordy Brenny with the Taxpayers League. WSSC rates are double those of Fairfax, including those for 6-person families who can least afford rate increases. State audit benchmarks comparing WSSC to Fairfax County and others in the area will be released in 2 days and are likely to show WSSC spends recklessly while ignoring fixes for soaring lost water, 18%, and wasted sewage treatment capacity, 43%. Interest rate and economic slowdown risks are very high, making next year a bad time to increase spending, especially with operating cash liquidity issues, shrinking pay-go for capital projects, and $68 million in delinquent customer receivables. Better controls are needed over operating and capital spending. WSSC should cut costs before raising rates. For years now, the Taxpayers League has been warning you that there were significant rate increases coming. WSSC agrees and is asking for 9% next year. Astounding. And that was after just last month publishing forecasts of 8% increase. The rating agencies don't care as long as ratepayers have sufficient income on paper to absorb an ad valorem tax increase when the cash runs out. The OIG steadfastly refuses to audit management plans, calling this a management problem. Annually, the T&E committee recommends above market rate increases, even though per capita demand for water is decreasing. After a brief pause following the state intervention in 1999, every year you've approved above market rate increases. WSSC has become yet another reason why businesses locate in Fairfax and don't look to Thrive 2050 for economic development answers. Please ask the state for help. They created this mess and they can fix it by splitting WSSC into 2 organizations by county. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brenny. Mr. President, that's it for this public hearing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bren and Ms. Kennedy. This public hearing is now closed. Item 7.5 is a public hearing in action on a resolution to amend the FY22 transportation fees, charges, and fares. Action scheduled immediately following this hearing. We have 2 speakers for this hearing. Ms. Kennedy, would you mind please calling on the first speaker?
Yes, our first speaker for this public hearing is Jane Lyons. Ms. Lyons, you have 2 minutes for your testimony.
Good afternoon, and thank you, President Hucker and council members, for the opportunity to provide testimony. My name is Jane Lyons, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Coalition for Smarter Growth. And as a part of our mission, I have been organizing the Montgomery Better Buses Coalition, which consists of nearly 30 groups, including labor, climate, and transit advocates, service providers, and community organizations who want to see better bus service and more affordable, accessible bus service in Montgomery County. We strongly support the resolution to extend the Fare Free program to January 1st, 2022, in order to provide the council adequate time to make a decision about ride-ons fares and effectively communicate that decision to the public. We would like to express our gratitude to the County Council for supporting Ride-On's continued free fare program during the pandemic, as well as instituting free fares for kids, seniors, and persons with disabilities going forward. Breaking down this barrier to transportation has provided residents with better access to essential jobs, services, and amenities. If fare collection were to resume for the first time in 19 months, people who have come to rely on free bus fares would need an adequate warning to prepare, especially given that nearly half of ride-on riders make less than $30,000 a year. Resuming fare collection on October 1st, this Friday, would give MCDOT only 2 days to communicate that change. Riders also deserve the council's deliberation of the fare equity study as promised, which was only delivered to the council very recently, to determine the best course of action moving forward in the medium and long term. January 1st will give 3 months for the public and council members to review the findings in the Fair Equity Study, for the T&E committee to make a recommendation to the council, and then for the full council to deliberate and vote, and then for MCDOT to then communicate that decision to riders. So thank you very much for your work thus far on free fares and for your consideration on its extension.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons. Our next speaker for this public hearing is Rebecca Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, you also have 2 minutes and you may begin as soon as you're ready.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate a lot of what Ms. Lyons just expressed, and I agree with everything that she just said. My testimony today exists in the fact that I've been a user of the Ride-On bus during this COVID period, and I very much agree with the fact that we should not implement fares until we believe that it's safe for COVID riders and bus drivers. When we don't ask for riders and drivers to handle fares, we create another a good, safe barrier. If we ask riders to pay when they get on the bus and they ask drivers to handle money and fares, this creates a cortex where we put a lot of our drivers and riders in higher risk for COVID. So I've watched the way that we've changed the Ride-On bus process in the last 12 months. We didn't allow bus riders originally until a few months ago to even get on in the front part of the bus, and so just to protect the riders and the drivers. And so I believe with the surge of the new variants and the way the county is super protective over our residents, I believe that keeping Ride-On buses free protects riders and drivers. Also, I echo the remarks that there are many people in our community who rely on Ride-On bus. Giving them an extra 3 months to figure out how they're going to pay for their transportation is extremely important. And so I don't have anything to add to Ms. Lynch's comments, so I'm just going to end my comments there.
Thank you very much, Ms. Baldwin. Mr. President, that wraps up the speakers for this public hearing.
Thank you so much to all of you. This public hearing is now closed. So we need a motion to approve the resolution, and we can have discussion of it. Dr. Orland, is there anything you need to jump in with at this point?
Just a couple of things. First of all, the staff report went out yesterday, and at the time, the resolution showing Mr. Hucker as the lead sponsor. Since then, we've learned at least 3 other council members want to co-sponsor. Council members Duwando, Glass, and Friedson. I'm not sure if any others have signed on.
Yeah. Navarro, Albornoz, Reamer.
Oh, okay. Well, as long as I got a full list, I'll put it in the final resolution. Secondly, the packet also said that a fair equity study would be sent shortly. It was sent shortly. It was sent a few hours afterwards, yesterday afternoon. So the council is in receipt of it. And then thirdly, the question has come up as to what's the lost revenue for the next 3 months, and DOT's estimate is a little under $4 million.
Right. Okay. Let me try to. So is there a motion to approve the resolution before we have discussion?
So moved.
Councilmember Rice moves. Councilmember Glass seconds. Thank you. Okay, now we can have discussion on the motion. As the sponsor, let me add a few thoughts. Thank you all to all the co-sponsors. This was sort of a unfortunately last minute resolution. Ride-On buses, as you know, serve as a lifeline, and they have throughout the pandemic for many of our residents and those who live in neighboring jurisdictions and work here. Our study has shown that many in our low-income communities, as Ms. Lyons mentioned, and according to our study, Montgomery County women in particular rely on Ride-On service for their daily needs. Throughout the pandemic, we've been able to serve our residents with free Ride-On buses and provide connectivity to our most vulnerable communities. They've also served important public health purposes as our residents have taken them to receive vaccination and testing at our public sites and private sites, and providing masks and water for residents who need them. So that's why the council, during our budget hearings in May 2021, decided to extend the Ride On Fair holiday through September 30th, which is this week. At the same time, the council approved a fare equity study, which was supposed to be conducted by the Department of Transportation. The fare equity study was due to be returned to the county council in July or August, giving the council enough time to decide on the future of Ride On fares, but we did not receive the study, as Dr. Orland mentioned, from the county executive until yesterday, after we added this item to the council agenda. So obviously receiving a 63-page fare equity study the day before the county council has to make a decision is frustrating and unprofessional, and doesn't allow staff time to digest the results. It's the latest in a pattern of actions like this. We also have to work with the fact that WMATA requires a 60-day notice ahead of any fare changes to the Ride On bus system, which obviously the executive branch should have considered when determining the urgency of the fare equity study. So if we had waited for the county executive, the fares would have resumed on Ride On, and we would have missed this opportunity today to extend the fare holiday. With no study in hand, many of us proposed to extend the free fares for Ride On until the end of 2021. And during that time now, staff can analyze the results of the fare equity study. We can recommend the best way forward for the future of Ride On. We obviously have to ensure that Ride On buses continue to serve our communities that need it the most, that our residents have equitable access to transportation, so we can improve the future trajectory and ridership of the Ride On bus system. So that's why we're here today. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I appreciate you putting this forward, and all of us supporting it. We all know how important it is, and just to emphasize briefly the importance of it. Pre-pandemic, we know that half of Ride On passengers earned less than $30,000 a year, and many of those individuals are still riding, whether they're going to hospitals, to grocery stores, cleaning office buildings, and at the same time, some of the higher income riders, they have more options at their disposal, and many of them are choosing to work remotely. And so that is why ridership has decreased during this pandemic, but it has remained steady for those who are transit dependent. And we know that many low-income passengers typically ride the Ride On throughout the county. They're actually staying in the county during their rides. And some of the greatest usage of Ride On is actually in our up county. It's in Gaithersburg and it's in Germantown, where Ride On is the only public transportation source. There is no metro rail up there. There is no metro bus there. And so the efforts that we here over the last number of years have been taking, I think, are just really important, from expanding the Kids Ride Free program, from expanding to free rides for seniors and individuals with disabilities. Thank you, Councilmember Reamer, for getting that done earlier this year. And I'll also note, thank you for speeding up the efforts to electrify our bus fleet. So while they might be free, we're making them greener as well. And at the end of the day, I wholeheartedly support these efforts, and will continue working to make sure that bus ridership is accessible and robust through January 1st, 2022, and definitely beyond then as well. So thank you, Mr. President.
You bet. Councilmember Novato.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also want to make sure that I'm included as a co-sponsor. I thought that we had indicated that, but just want to make sure that it's clear. And yes, I mean, obviously, I think one of the things that we are finding out time and time again is that this pandemic lasted a lot longer than we had planned for originally. And we thought that we were dealing with something that was going to be a little bit more short term. And so that has prompted us to revisit many of the decisions that we made. And I think this one in particular is an important one. As has been stated, and I know we've all had conversations with constituents, residents in the community. It's still a very tough situation out there in public transportation and access to public transportation, and especially being able to mitigate the cost, I think, is something that we want to continue to promote. And so I do believe that this is an important step forward, and I thank you, Mr. President, for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too wanted to be added as a co-sponsor. I thought I was, but if I'm not, please add me. I am certainly always concerned about a loss of revenue for any whether it be the county or any business or whatever. But I have been an advocate for many, many years, and I know several of my colleagues have as well, that we should really look at the fares in general. Because, and I certainly want to look at the study. I haven't read the study, obviously. But when someone drives in a vehicle on a county road, there's an expense involved, but they don't have to reach their hand each time and pay something. And so therefore, whenever you do that, you realize that you're paying for something. And that's exactly what happens when you get on public transportation. And I'm someone that believes if we really want to be advocates for public transportation, which all of us do, then I believe it's something that we should look at, as to the words of Councilmember Glass, certainly for this piece of legislation, but beyond as well. I believe it's an investment that we should be making and that we haven't made it yet. So, except for, during the pandemic. So I believe that this is a great step in the right direction and should be the first part of a major conversation. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I yield back.
Thank you. And just to be clear, I think not everyone's listed on the packet because of the deadline for that to go out. I think everybody's listed on the press release. And if everybody's listed, if it's fine with everybody, I'd prefer to list it as a full council sponsorship. Council Vice President Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership on this. This is so important, and I associate myself very much with all of the comments of my colleagues thus far. I would also add, I know all of us have expressed our deep appreciation, in particular to our bus drivers throughout the pandemic who have heroically continued to report to work and perform the incredibly important duties of their jobs, and to the support personnel who help ensure that our buses are in top shape and are able to move around as well. We certainly thank them. And I really want to express my appreciation to Ms. Lyons and Ms. Baldwin for their testimony, because these are some of those issues that don't often get the attention that they deserve. And these decisions have significant impact on the quality of life of our residents. And I appreciated you, Council President Hucker, highlighting the public health implications of this as well. We are not out of the woods, I think, by a long shot. And so while we've made great strides as we transition out of this dark time, we have to make sure that, no pun intended, we keep our foot on the gas, or electrified vehicle, if you will, so that we can continue to be able to move forward. So appreciate your leadership. Would be honored to be listed as a co-sponsor, and happy this will be a full council action. Thank you.
Accelerator. I've been corrected before. Council Member Rice.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Just wanted to make sure I was listed as a co-sponsor. And then again, thank you so much. You guys have heard me talk about how important this was back when, way in the day, I used to ride on after school every day and used to get tokens, and how important this is, as you heard from some of the folks that testified about how people are still utilizing this. And thank you for highlighting the fact that many residents throughout my district continue to have very high usage of Ride-On. It's the reason why we just talked about this yesterday in the Fed committee meeting, where we were talking about Thrive and talking about the opportunity and access for individuals to get to the agricultural reserve and all the accoutrements that are there that we're now seeing pop up in the Up County. So, it's incredibly imperative for us to continue this. And so thank you, Mr. President, for your continued leadership on this.
Thank you. Council Member Friedson.
Thank you, Council President, for your leadership on this and for making sure that we were moving this forward, and to your colleagues on the Transportation and Environment Committee in particular, who really focused on this issue, particularly during the pandemic. Pleased to be listed as a co-sponsor of this. I think it's important to reiterate the point made earlier by Councilmember Katz. Contrary to what we sometimes talk about, we already subsidize all forms of transportation. We subsidize it through parking, we subsidize it through roads, we subsidize it through critical investments in mass transit. And we do it because transportation is a social and economic imperative. And ensuring that our residents can get home, can get to work, can enjoy their quality of life is part of our responsibility in government. And this is part of that responsibility. I appreciate the fact that we are extending this, allowing us to have an equity framework and to think about our other environmental goals as well as we make a determination outside of this extension of the fair holiday, what a permanent solution will look like. And this certainly allows us to have the thoughtful and deliberative discussion that this requires because of how important it is to our community from a social perspective, from a moral perspective, from an economic perspective. This is going to help us improve transit access, grow bus ridership, and help our workforce get to and from their jobs as we continue the economic recovery. That's just a win-win for our climate, for our local economy, and appreciate the ability to work with colleagues on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, great. All those in favor of the resolution, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Terrific. Dr. Orland, thank you so much for your analysis on this and for us, particularly over the weekend. We went back and forth a number of times. Very much appreciated. And Mr. Camacho as well. Okay, now we can move on to legislative session day 25. We will now consider the county executive's veto of Bill 321, the Business Improvement District established. We can have discussion after a motion. Is there a motion to override the county executive's veto of Bill 321?
So moved.
Councilmember Reamer moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Councilmember Novato seconds. Okay. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to just share a few thoughts. This has been an inordinately difficult process, and I understand why. You know, there are a lot of difficult undercurrents about change and Silver Spring, and I think people have apprehension. You know, there are many in our community have apprehension about what the next 5, 10, 15 years might bring. But I think there has been a fair amount of misinformation about this proposal that has circulated in the community. And I think it's helpful, I hope anyway, if we can just reiterate some of the facts about it, but also, talk about what the process is going to be going forward. Overall, what we're doing with this legislation and by overriding the veto is we are allowing a bid to form. The bid doesn't exist until it then forms, and it doesn't have any funding until the county then provides it through the budget process. So this is just one step in a longer process to create a business improvement district. And I know that there are continuing concerns, and I just want to say I think we have plenty of time to bring the community together and to work on those concerns, and to emerge with something that will really succeed. But in order to do that, we'll need all parties to be willing to work together, and that's we have a ways to go to get to that point. And I think we need to figure out how to get there. But I do think this is an important initiative. It's focused on economic development for Silver Spring, where the county has invested hundreds of millions of dollars with success. I mean, Silver Spring is awesome. I love it. I spend a lot of time there. I think we probably all do. But it also has not fulfilled its potential. I mean, the retail environment could be stronger. It's on its way, but it's not there. I should just say, in other words, I think it could always be better. It could always be greater. And I think, and a lot of us think, that Silver Spring has kind of outgrown its government management. The way that we market Silver Spring, the way that we manage Silver Spring is one where the government does that work. And it's just, we need more than that. We need the expertise of the private sector sitting at the table, figuring out how to better market Silver Spring. And that's what this proposal does. So we pared this back significantly from what the private sector applicants were seeking. They initially wanted to be able to absorb the red shirt operation and kind of have a full ownership of the operation of Silver Spring, from marketing to picking up the trash. But we just felt like that was a bit too much, and we wanted to focus this operation on marketing. I don't really think that it's well understood that that's all this bid does, is market Silver Spring. It will take revenue that is going to marketing efforts that are not very good, and it will allow those funds to be spent by professionals who really know what they're doing, and market all of Silver Spring. We're not talking about marketing just some parts of Silver Spring. We're talking about marketing the whole of Silver Spring and creating a rising tide that can lift all boats. And I think that will help all the businesses of Silver Spring, whether you're a micro business of 1 or 2 or 3 employees, or whether you're a restaurant with 50 or 100 employees. Just generally continuing to help boost Silver Spring and get more people interested to come there and spend money is going to be to your advantage. But the bid that we have created, that we will be legalizing, and that will be formed following up, has a very narrow mandate that it can just do marketing. So I have to admit, I don't understand what the apprehension is about that. It's a very limited mission. But I have heard from residents of the community who believe things like the bid will change my rights as a tenant. That my landlord will be able to charge fees or do things that they can't do now. And that's just not true. This has zero effect on the rights of a commercial tenant or any tenant. They all have the same rights today as they did yesterday. And this bid is funded exclusively from the property tax paid by property owners. There are 2 kinds of bids. One is paid by property owners. The other is paid by business operators. I don't think that there would be support for a bid funded by business operators. I don't think the businesses would like that. And generally those types of bids aren't that successful because they're too expensive for the businesses to really fund. But the property owners can fund it. And it is a more equitable approach to require property owners to pay for this kind of work than business operators. So, in general, I think it's a good idea to have a property tax funded bid. And that's what we do, but it's the existing property tax. It's not a new property tax. There's no tax increase in this proposal. So it does not increase the costs of any small business to operate in Silver Spring. So again, I don't know how this produces a bad outcome when it doesn't cost a business a penny for it to happen, and its mission is focused on marketing. But having said that, I share the criticism of the process that brought us here. I don't think our small business community was adequately engaged. I think the property owners said, well, I guess since we're going to pay for it, we'll just, we'll talk amongst ourselves. And that's just not adequate. And there has been quite a backlash to that. So we have to do more work to engage the small businesses. But the good news is the board structure can match the Silver Spring community. And 5 out of 9 board seats are for businesses that have either fewer than 50 employees or less than $20 million in property value. So that could be all kinds of things, all kinds of business owners. And, we should work together and with the applicants to create a board, an initial board that reflects the community. We could see examples of that in other operations in the county. So I think that is within our reach. And, I think we can hold out that we want to see that happen as a condition of providing our funds. We could have a micro business on that board. I know the applicants are happy to have a micro business on that board. with fewer than 5 employees. That we can do that. So, the last comment I'd make, I know a lot of council members have been very interested in the idea of a Main Street organization, and we talked about that. I think we, again, in response to concerns about whether this organization would have the capacity to really provide the kind of handheld service needed by some of our smallest businesses, we can create a Main Street organization, a nonprofit, that it will be county funded, doesn't even have to be funded by the businesses, to provide that kind of more substantial operational help to our smallest businesses. And they can come out of this with more county resources devoted to their specific needs, than what we have today. And so, I hope we can all kind of work together and bring parties around the table together and just make it happen, because at the end of the day, we need the private sector to provide the leadership for Silver Spring, and that's what they're offering to do. But with all community issues, there's a lot of politics. It's never easy, and there's history from other communities that I think is in the backdrop for a lot of these business owners. Cycles of businesses moving into areas, having those areas succeed, and then gradually being, forced out through rent increases over time as those areas have succeeded. That is in the minds of a lot of our business owners, and we understand that. We want to help those businesses compete as best we can as Silver Spring progresses, and that's what the bid can do, and that's what the Main Street can do. So again, this is just one step in the process, and I think that this can work well if we can just bring everybody together. And thank my colleagues and the council president for diligent work on this challenging topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it has been a lot of work, and it's going to continue to be. I'm just going to jump in quickly and then call on colleagues. Just to frame this, as everyone knows, I think the county and the state and the federal government invested deeply in the redevelopment of Silver Spring a little over 20 years ago, nearly $1 billion. And what was built was a beautiful tapestry of thriving and diverse businesses and neighborhoods that support them. And it was seen as a national success story. It made Silver Spring a very highly desirable place to live and work. But for 20 years in a row now, we've been losing jobs and retail options. It'd be far worse without the growth of United Therapeutics in downtown Silver Spring, which is a real one-off, unique company we're so lucky to have there. But the overall business climate has been very, very challenged. And that's a challenge to all of us. It's a crisis. That job loss has rapidly accelerated. It's cratered during the last 3 years. And it started before COVID. It's not just due to COVID, but it's continued through the pandemic, and it's persisting today. Just walk through there and count the empty storefronts. We are not positioned to address that. Absent this proposal, we've lost, going back years, premier retail gathering spaces like Borders, everybody remembers, years ago, that have not been replaced with new gathering places that bring us together. We've not just retail, but lost 27 restaurants just in the last few years. You all remember iconic institutions like Pachi's and Expectations and AG Kitchen, 8407, Urban Butcher, even ones that were there for decades, like Sergio's and Mrs. K's, which succeeded for 90 years, they're now gone. We used to market Silver Spring. We used to attract patrons from all over the metro area. If you went there on a Thursday or a Friday or Saturday night, 6 months a year, you were shoving your way or jostling through crowds of people that were out enjoying our restaurants and our theaters and music and nightlife, and that's all gone. We have still Silver Spring fountain-inspired logos erected at gateways to Silver Spring on 16th Street and Georgia Avenue. We had consistent banners and ads with that logo. And for many years that worked. We had these surging diverse crowds of young people and families and seniors spending money and enjoying the nightlife in Silver Spring. But when we stopped marketing it years ago, it suffered greatly. And it's such a shame because it has so much to offer. And our businesses have suffered because of that. Silver Spring is much more than just the small businesses we're talking about. It's a place, it's a community that we should be celebrating the best of what ties Silver Spring together and marketing that. It's one of the top 10 most diverse areas of the country. And it has never had a truly professional placemaking effort that highlights its strengths, but our competition does across the DMV in Northern Virginia and all over DC. They have these tools, but we don't have those in Montgomery County. We still have those outdated gateways on 16th Street in Georgia. One has a dent in it from a car that hit it, shaped like a fountain, but the fountain was removed years ago. That's pathetic. So after I became a council member, because there was so little support for our small businesses, I started Silver Spring Restaurant Week with my legislative staff, and we ran it for 5 years before turning it over to Visit in Montgomery. We also started Silver Screens, outdoor movie nights, year after year in partnership with AFI. I was willing to try anything just to bring customers to Silver Springs to patronize our suffering small businesses. And with many of you, I fought for the grants to keep our businesses whole when they were hurt by the Studio Plaza construction and by the Purple Line. But council members can't market Silver Spring well. We'll never do a good enough job. It's not our job. It's not our training. And our small businesses should not need grants from the county just to stay afloat. They should have customers lining up like they used to enjoy our amazing international cuisine, to try all our local coffee shops and our craft breweries, and to shop at our stores. But the biggest missing piece is professional marketing to get customers back in partnership with our county agencies to help make people feel safe and welcome, and enhance social services to address our residents experiencing homelessness. We've invested so much in Silver Spring's reputations, and reputations take a very long time to build, and they can go away very quickly. I hear from people every single day from their direct lived experience about their perceptions of downtown Silver Spring, and I have for years, representing it for 15 years now. And I can tell you it's changing for the worse. It's been changing rapidly in the last few years. Reputations can go away quickly and change very quickly, and ours is at a tipping point. I worry that we're 1 or 2 bad news stories away from losing patrons for a very, very long time in downtown Silver Spring. We have an important tool in front of us that we can use to help promote our small businesses and to remind people from all over the DMV for all the great reasons they love Silver Spring and they should come back and spend some money. So to me, that's why we need to take the step today. And this is just the first step. Then we need to bring all the stakeholders together to market Silver Spring, to seek Main Street funds from the state, to enhance our security, to improve the urban district and the regional center under their new leadership, and to just work collaboratively to make Silver Spring the best it can be and as successful as it can be. Councilmember Novato.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I just want to share that, so we've heard the following feedback, right? So we heard that we needed to do something to continue to unlock Silver Spring's amazing potential. And we also heard that something had to be done to ensure that the small businesses, mostly minority-owned businesses, have a seat at the table. Because after all, they are the heartbeat of Silver Spring. And the committees deliberated and recognized this feedback. So we went to work to achieve these shared goals. We adopted Councilmember Jawando's amendment that restructured the composition of the bid, preserving the role of the Silver Spring Urban District and the red shirts. We went on record stating our commitment to working with our state legislature to amend the bid state law to make sure the voting member structure included the entire business community. We are absolutely supportive of our D20 delegation's efforts, and we are reinforcing that commitment via a resolution spearheaded by Councilmember Glass. In addition, we committed to bringing a Main Street concept to Fenton Village and possibly even to other areas like Wheaton and Germantown to provide additional strategic and targeted support to our vibrant small business community. The council support for small businesses is not something that is new. For example, today we have invested over $280 million in COVID-19 relief for our businesses with a very strong target and strategic targeting of small businesses. I recall that we have, I think, invested about $1.2 million in our small business impact assistance program. For those small businesses impacted by the county's initiated redevelopment or revitalization projects, starting in Wheaton, it was a law that I authored and we funded this law. And because of that, so many of those small businesses were able to ride that particular wave and are still there. We established microloan programs to target the micro businesses that just need that seed funding to be able to be successful. I remember that we funded a small business navigator. We actually proposed to council and adopted $700,000 to fund a disparity study, which is needed to reauthorize the Minority Female Disabled Program. We created a small business position in our Economic Development Corporation. We have adopted local preference programs. We have hosted procurement and minority business task forces. And we have also invested over $400 million to revitalize places like Wheaton, which is the Latino epicenter of the county. And we have made a $40 million down payment in Viva White Oak project that the council has championed and is located in the epicenter of our county's Black community. So we have worked diligently to give life to our economic development platform. We made progress in workforce development, transportation, for example, the Flash Bus rapid transit system in targeted areas like Route 29 corridor. We have worked on housing. We have worked on business development. We've done all of this with a stated emphasis on equity as a key ingredient for a thriving county. This is why I believe that this effort will in fact be another component in our efforts to promote economic development that is rooted in equity and driven by prosperity and abundance. And it is just the beginning, as it was stated. This is not the end all be all. This is just one step in making sure that a concept like this can be made to work to make sure that Silver Spring continues to unlock that extraordinary potential that so many people have worked to create for so many years. And I really do believe that absolutely what makes Silver Spring amazing are its small businesses, its eclectic mix. That is what folks are looking for. And I am certain that not only through something like this, but a lot more programs and supports, mechanisms, et cetera, that the county already has, been on record doing, that we can expand a lot of that and do a lot more and see Silver Spring continue to be that extraordinary place. It's unique. And again, I think that this will only enhance all of that effort. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I will be voting to override the veto.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. This is a tough day for me personally on the council. This morning, we honored the Black businesses and African immigrant businesses in the county, many of which are in downtown Silver Spring, including our very large Ethiopian business community and the Ethiopian Chamber of Commerce, who is opposed to this bill and has asked us not to override the veto, along with the Montgomery County Black Collective, the Montgomery County Black Business Council, and the statewide Maryland Black Chamber of Commerce. All have asked us, as representatives of both African and other Black-owned businesses, to not take this step. They've done so because you don't build upon the greatness that is Silver Spring. And as I've said before, I love Silver Spring. I'm there probably 3-4 days downtown Silver Spring a week. I grew up there. We all love Silver Spring and we've seen it grow. But you don't build upon that greatness and all the great small businesses. You don't build a house on a crumbling foundation. And as Councilmember Reamer mentioned, this has been crumbling since the beginning. The very reason we shouldn't move forward is the reason that was stated, that how this process has gone, and the initial exclusion of hundreds of businesses in Fenton Village and the drawing of the lines by the people who put forward the bid. The fact that there hasn't been meaningful input and participation. But most importantly, that all aside, is the inequitable structure of the bid itself. it's been stated that there's 9 members and that two of them will be under smaller property owners. But the fact remains that property owners with the largest and most expensive property not only have the plurality of seats on the board, but they also have more votes in who's on the board and ultimately the decisions of how this money is spent to market and to promote the greatness that is Silver Spring. And that's a concentrated group. It's one of the reasons that the racial equity and social justice statement for this bill is one of 3 that has been negative. There have been 43 bills introduced since racial equity and social justice statements were started being written under the great leadership of Councilmember Navarro on this council. Only 3 of those 43 have had or said bills would have a negative impact on racial equity and social justice. This is one of those bills. And it said so because of, this is what they said, the exclusion of residents from the Silver Spring Bid Board and the concentration of voting power for board members with the largest assets shifts the power of public decision-making from a stakeholder group representing diverse and income backgrounds to a stakeholder group that predominantly represents the interests of medium and large businesses. Granting greater voting power to board members with larger businesses also shifts decision-making power from people of color-owned businesses to white-owned businesses, as the latter on average are larger than the former. This does not change at all in the bill that we have before us because we can't change it because of state law. Working with our delegates Charkoudian and Wilkins and Moon and Senator Smith, the D20 delegation who represents this area, they sent a very compelling and really well thought out letter that details the bill that they are preparing to introduce as a pre-file, a local bill that would change this inequitable structure, allow us on the county council to change this inequitable structure, which if we overturn the veto today, as our packet states, will bake in the inequity. If the bill that the D20 delegation has put forward, even if it passes, because this has already moved forward, nothing will have to change. It could stay as it would be grandfathered in, is the analysis from our staff. One of the major requirements of the D20 bill was that 65% of small businesses agree to even have a bid, a business improvement district. That number we're nowhere close to that number right now. So if one of the main provisions of their bill were to pass, if we pass a resolution saying we agree in theory with the provisions of their bill, which I understand that's the resolution to come, we would be in violation. This bill would be in violation, in contradiction to that, because we don't have the agreement of 65% of the business owners in Silver Spring, downtown Silver Spring. And so the idea that we're going to build this on this foundation is not what we want to do. The last 2 things I'll say. No one is saying this or nothing. I could understand if that were the options. What I'm saying, what the Black business groups I mentioned, including, in addition to the Silver Spring advisory community, Silver Spring advisory, advisory district community, advisory board rather, excuse me, who's written us 3 times asking us not to move forward with this. In addition to the 200 businesses in Fenton Village and many others, what they're asking us to do is to give a few months to the District 20 delegation to pass this better bill and use that time to get to 65% of business owners that agree to have a bid that's equitable and that includes everybody, and that we can start over and not build this from a crumbling foundation. No one's saying don't market Silver Spring better. No one's saying don't have a new approach. We all agree with that. The question is, how are we going to do it? Are we going to do it in an inclusive way? Are we going to do it in a way that includes everybody, where there's equitable voting distribution and decision-making power? Nothing about us without us. That's what people are saying. This is not an all or nothing. It was stated twice by my colleagues that we need professionals that know what they're doing, and we need professional marketing. I contend that these 65% of small businesses are professionals, and they should have a voice in saying what we're doing. This is not the way to do this. Why lead to acrimony? Final point I'll make. The tax that will be levied, that this council will then have to come back and decide what the rate is, and will be levied, absolutely accrues to these small businesses through the form of rent. And whatever we set the rate at, there's pass-through costs. They're going to be paying it, if not directly, indirectly. So another reason they should have a say, an equal say, not a, we'll take it under consideration. Thanks for coming, and we'll decide. An actual voting say. You don't have a voice if you don't have a vote. And the way this structures it, bid members would have one vote per $500,000 of assessed value of non-exempt property. And those are the people who would elect the bid board. That has not changed. That is what is before the body in the override right now. Property owners with accrued value of less than $500,000 only have one vote. So it's imbalanced. That is the core of this issue. In addition to all of the people who have reached out, I just do not know why we would do this with all of this acrimony, with this crumbling foundation, when we can wait 3, 4, or 5 months, build consensus, and come together with a bid that brings the community together and is more equitable. Thank you, Mr. President.
Sure. I was asked to make sure everybody saw the letters from the Hispanic Chamber and the Long Branch Business League that arrived yesterday in support of the override, and should clarify that, of course, any program we pass would have to conform with state law. We don't have any choice. All of our programs do. Council Member Glass.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'll say I'm in the council office building, and the internet has been shaky all day. So if I freeze or otherwise, you'll know why. But I moved to Silver Spring more than 20 years ago because of the promise and the excitement of what I knew it could be. And I've been there for long enough. I've seen it on the upswing. And during that time, I moved from renting a unit. I moved down the road to South Silver Spring along East-West Highway, and I worked with neighbors to form a neighborhood association. I know my colleagues know all of this, but we formed the South Silver Spring Neighborhood Association during a meeting at Mayorga. Talk about businesses of yore, right? And we went on to organize and hold celebrations and meetings. And the South Silver Spring Street Festival was held for nearly a decade. And it was awesome. It was activation. And now I live right up the road. And over the last few months, neighbors have stopped me while I'm walking my dogs to ask me about the bid. And in the conversations, they admitted not knowing a whole lot of the details, but seeing things online, on social media, that they were just curious. And when any of my neighbors engaged me and asked me about the bid, I asked them in turn if they think that Silver Spring could be better. And every single time, they say yes, that Silver Spring can be better. And that's why we're having this conversation, because all of us agree that Silver Spring can be an even better place to live, work, and play. And the legislation that was introduced originally, I think, needed to be improved upon. I think that's the truth. And that's why I was not a co-sponsor when it was originally introduced, because it needed some work. But I think there has been some work, and I appreciate the work that the Joint Committee did over the summer that better defined the roles and the responsibilities, to delineate the structure of the bid, in so much as we on the council, the county government, was able to do that because, as has been noted, much of that is dictated by state law. And recognizing some of those shortcomings, that's why I joined with the two sponsors of the legislation to request that a Main Street partnership in Fenton Village be formed. That is the area where I've heard the most concerns from business owners and nearby restaurants. And so it made sense to make sure that we had a program or funding stream specifically to address any concerns people have in a part of downtown Silver Spring that is mostly independent and minority business owners. And I've spoken with every member of the District 20 delegation, and I appreciate their outreach and the conversations they have had with so many of us. You know, the thoughtful leadership that Senator Smith and Delegates Moon, Wilkins, and Charkoudian have shown is a testament to the importance of good relationships in Rockville and Annapolis. And in the letter that they wrote to us, they asked for our support in their efforts to amend state legislation. And I'm in support of changes at the state level. And that is why after this conversation, we're going to be having another conversation to codify our support for state changes. That's why I introduced a resolution, we'll be introducing a resolution after this vote that expresses the council's support for District 20 and other state lawmakers to reform the state law, because we can't fix this all by ourselves here. It takes their leadership and initiative. And by passing a resolution, I think that shows the clearest signal that we want to work with them to help them make the changes that only they can make. And so I'll close by saying I am going to support the override because we've built in a number of safeguards and we've stated our commitment to making this legislation even better, to making this bid even better, to making future bids, should they happen, even better. You know, Silver Spring businesses are special, and they're not just coffee shops and restaurants, they're community gathering spots. The reality is Kefa Cafe is an extension of our living room. It is the community's living room. And I am committed to improving this legislation, improving Silver Spring here on the council with our state partners. And I think the steps that we've taken are a continuation of that spirit. And we will get to a place where more residents and more businesses can thrive in downtown Silver Spring. So thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President, and thanks to colleagues for all the comments, which I very much appreciate. I feel confident in the direction that we are taking here today, based on a lot of work that has gone into this, a lot of the changes that have been made. There are a number of concessions, a number of compromises that have already occurred. There's a continuing conversation that I know many of us continue to have with the District 20 delegation on changes, and the actions that we're taking today don't preclude legislative changes to the state enabling legislation. I know those conversations will continue. We're going to talk about that shortly, but the bottom line, as we heard before, and as the council president and district council member eloquently discussed at the outset of this conversation, is that Silver Spring is critical to the county's economic development goals. It's critical to the county's quality of life. It is in so many ways the place that defines how Montgomery County is doing economically, and whether or not we are growing and expanding, or whether or not we are retreating and falling short of the potential that we have. It deserves our attention. It deserves our support. It deserves to be in a position to reach its tremendous potential as one of the great places, not just in Montgomery County, but across the region and frankly, anywhere in the world. I did just want to note, as we talk about the state legislative changes, that they do have countywide impacts. And this discussion is part of a broader discussion with many groups, citizen groups, and other resident advocacy groups throughout the county, and that countywide impact is significant. I know that we all want the Business Improvement District to work for Silver Spring holistically, the rising tide that lifts all boats and allows Silver Spring to reach its potential, as was discussed earlier. There's a lot of momentum that has been created, and certainly we should be building on that momentum in Silver Spring and also in other areas of the county where there are similar efforts already underway, and in many cases have been worked on for more than a decade. So I just hope as we have this conversation that we talk about support for Silver Spring, and like we heard with the Main Street conversation and some of these other conversations, that we think through and make sure that we're not only lifting up Silver Spring in this conversation, which we all are focused on today, but we make sure that we're lifting up all of these other areas of significant opportunity. You heard Wheaton, you heard Germantown, the Pike District in North Bethesda. There's significant pre-bid efforts that there's significant buy-in from businesses, residents, and a wide breadth of community stakeholders. Friendship Heights, we could go on and on here about those opportunities. I know those conversations will take place as we move forward. So, as we move forward with this process, I just hope that we discuss the changes that we're going to make that have countywide impacts, that we reflect that we not be overly prescriptive, in particular to recognize the fact that Silver Spring is unique and it is special, and we need to make sure that we allow for that community to prosper to the greatest extent possible. But in doing so, that we also have a big picture perspective, and that we lift up Silver Spring, we lift up so many other of our urban districts throughout the county, and that we reach our economic development goals, and we reach our improved quality of life for so many residents. We create new jobs, new opportunities, new amenities, and new services, not just in certain parts of the county, but in all parts of the county, which I know is our shared goal, our shared interest here. So pleased to join colleagues on this effort and look forward to continuing that effort, because we know that today is just one step among many for Silver Spring and beyond throughout Montgomery County.
One step indeed. Council Vice President Albornoz.
Thanks. Listen, a lot of really thoughtful comments have been said all the way around, and coming from a very impassioned place and an authentic one. Just want to make a few observations. The first is that in my conversations, both with people who have expressed concerns over both the process and the ultimate product of what's being delivered today, as well as conversations with people that have been on the ground trying to develop it and are very much in favor of it, there very much appears to be a lot more agreement than disagreement. There's agreement that Silver Spring is a treasure, that billions of dollars have been invested in its success, and that there is a lot on the line to ensure that continued success. There is agreement that we can't sit idly by and not do anything, that we must be aggressive in our approach in how we market Silver Spring. Agreement in many of the amendments that were placed forward and discussed at great length through the committee sessions and through public testimony and through private conversations that addressed and refined and smoothed out some of the legitimate issues that were raised by a number of people. And what we've ended up with is a product that is concentrating on the marketing of downtown Silver Spring. And having participated in one or two of these sessions with firms that have been hired to market other locations across the county, one of the first things that they do is an on-site assessment of what works. What are the things that bind those communities together? What creates a sense of place? What are the assets and treasures that we want to highlight and uplift? And any communications firm worth their weight is going to immediately see and feel that this unique tapestry of businesses, both small, medium, and large, that make up and the success of downtown Silver Spring are something to be celebrated and uplifted. And so I understand that there have been reservations made by some. I don't appreciate that there is an implication in any way that this body, through the actions of what will be the majority, in any way implies that we don't take seriously or don't take into account the voices of everyone within our Silver Spring community, and worse yet, underappreciate their professionalism. That could not be further from the truth. And I don't think it's fair to say that at all. And I really appreciate Councilmember Navarro providing some context for the history of the actions that both previous councils, the previous county executive, and this current council have taken to ensure the vitality, not just of Silver Spring, but of our entire community. We can disagree on the merits of the specific provisions within this particular piece of legislation, but let's not lose sight or perspective on the fact that we collectively have been making decisions and will continue to make decisions that we believe are in the best interest of all of our county residents, especially those most vulnerable. And so I feel like, as the council president noted and Chairman Reamer as well, that this is another step in that process. We are talking about the marketing of Silver Spring. And there are many more decisions that we are going to have to make in addition to the marketing that provide additional support for all of our businesses in downtown Silver Spring and that really unleash the potential that it is for all of us. So I am sad and brokenhearted, frankly, over the undertones and of some of the conversations that we've all been having. And I take very seriously the concerns that have been raised, but I'm not confident that after 3 months we're gonna get to 65%. And I think that we have to make sure that we move forward and that we adjust and we make changes as necessary moving forward. And I have confidence that we will. We will learn from this process. We will continue to embrace the change that is inevitable and all around us. So I appreciate this conversation. It will be one of many more that we have. But on the whole, I really do agree with the work of this committee, where we are, and I will be supporting the resolution later as well, because I think it sends an important message to codify what we've been saying publicly and authentically been saying publicly. So, thank you, Mr. President. I yield back to you.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much. And I'm also in the council building, so I apologize if we get some breakup here. Normally, the reason why I come to the council building is to get stable internet access, because at home I don't have that, but we'll see. So let me try and be quick. When we made amendments to the bid bill, we did it because of the concerns that we heard from residents, and primarily those surrounded the who's going to be on the board, and ensuring that we had representatives that were there for some of our smaller businesses were incredibly important. And for me, as a person who not only is born and raised here in Montgomery County, but who grew up in Silver Spring, who went to Tacoma Park Intermediate School and graduated from Blair, and who spent all of my formative years in downtown Silver Spring, seeing the transformation from a defunct city place to what it is now and the opportunity for it to be vibrant, is just incredibly important. And this is a next step in that iteration. Even at the time when we were looking at revamping City Place, there were plenty of people who were objecting and saying that's not what we should do. You know, we shouldn't rebuild some of this. And look, all those things will still happen. And it's not to disrespect people in their vision and their ideas. But the reality is that we continue to try and lead in a way that encompasses what we think is going to be best in the interest of the greater Silver Spring community as a whole. Does that mean that everybody is always going to be on board? Absolutely not. I experienced it in my district, and I know Councilmember Hucker is now experiencing it in his. But I also believe that as a district council member, there is a certain amount of deference to understanding that it is important for the district council member to reach out and know what is the community talking about in the greater sense, and what do we see as some of the options that are going to provide more opportunities for those individuals. I've spoken to many business owners who are not happy. They've texted me and been very clear about their opinion, but I've also heard from some business owners, and these are small businesses, not large, who also say that this is something that they think will work for them and they want to see it move forward. So for me, in what I've seen, the decisions have been on both sides of the aisle. And so it makes it tough for an individual who doesn't represent that district to say well, I need to go in a different direction. We already voted, and we voted and made it very clear in a 7-1 vote that we were supporting this process. Today is merely responding to the county executive who has decided to veto the bill. It doesn't change where I was back then in terms of a difficult decision that I made in terms of being supportive of this and hoping that we have a bid process that does work. I do want to remind folks that nothing is ever definite. As the legislator at both the state and local level, everything is always subject to tomorrow's legislation. And so nothing is ever set in stone. If in fact we do find that there are things that are not working, we can change them. If the state believes that they need to somehow impact local jurisdictions' ability to do things, they can opt to do that as well. Those are always options that are always before us. And so I just want to make very clear that there's no finality in terms of what this process is. This is just the beginning. So let me close with this. I do believe that it's important for us to make sure that our bid becomes an incubator of local worker cooperatives, as well as helping to establish neighborhood land trusts for affordable housing and small businesses. And those kinds of initiatives will help to dismantle some of the systemic racism we've seen as a part of our communities, really by making sure that we have balanced ethical principles in organizations and business. And so I encourage us to make sure that we're looking at that. And also, as a part of our bid board, I encourage those board members to make sure that they're including in their discussion and decisions residents and other social justice advocates who are there in the community, creating a participatory model in which everybody has a say. I remember when then County Executive Leggett said, everybody always said, how are you going to put all these people at a table? If you only have a 9-member table, guess what? Build a bigger table and make sure that other folks are still included in these types of discussions. I will tell you, you don't have to be a member of the board to still have an impact on the board. I remember when I first started off as a young man who had moved with his wife to Germantown and was very impactful in terms of great things happening in the Germantown community before ever stepping foot in elected office. And so those kinds of things will continue. Community will still have a voice and really be able to make sure that we have a campaign which is focused on ethical decisions, things that make sense for furthering the Silver Spring community. And so because of that, I look forward to continuing in my short tenure of a little over a year, working with Councilmember Hucker as district council member, because Silver Spring is still home to me, and making sure that we have an iteration that works for all businesses in Silver Spring. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you all. So Councilmember Reamer moved.
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much. I will be as brief as I possibly can, but and I just wanted it to be known that I too have wrestled with this legislation. We all have. This is something that we all know, that we all knew that needed to be done. I'm not the council member for this district, obviously, but as was mentioned by Councilmember Rice, I certainly look to the council member, Council President Hucker, whose district this is, as well as others in that area and the at large, to what they believe. But as is no secret, I'm a champion of small business. I've lived the life. I grew up behind the counter. I know the pleasures and the struggles of a small business, and there are both. But I also know that there's the fear of the unknown. And this one has a little bit of the fear of the unknown. This one is that, my rent can go up. I can't afford more. I don't want to pay more. I can't. And none of that has to happen. And we need to make certain as a council, as a community, that doesn't happen. We need to get Silver Spring, which truly, my lifetime, though I didn't live in Silver Spring, I went to Silver Spring probably once or twice a week. I mean, I belonged to a youth group in Tacoma Park, and that's how you got there. I have seen Silver Spring go from a place where we were all extremely proud to a place that we've got to help out again. I mean, it was a big deal. The Heck Company, there was all these major stores when they were major stores in Silver Spring. And so we've seen it go down We've realized that every place in Montgomery County is unique, and we realize that every area needs to have a unique way to be successful. And a success, let's face facts, success for a property owner might not be the same definition as success for a small business owner, but they need each other in order to be successful. They need to be sitting together, whether it's however we can discuss the issue, force the issue, they need each other in order to get to a better place. So therefore, I am going to vote to override the veto. I am also going to be supportive of the resolution, and I believe this can truly be a stepping stone to bring people together. Sometimes people get together in a better way when they don't start off in the same reading from the same sheet of music. You get much better success sometimes when people are deciding that they need to sing harmony while others are singing the lead. So we need to get this done, and if we wait, we're going to have a real issue. So I will be supportive of the resolution, of the vote as well as the resolution. And with that, I turn it back over to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Council Member. And you know, from running a small business, no businesses have protection against rent increases now. And we don't have any control over that. That's up to the governor. But we do have control over the fee. And I think, like most of us, we're not interested in raising the fee. We're interested in making this succeed. So that won't be a driver in any rent increases. But I understand that concern is out there, and I think we need to do a better job of addressing it and repeating that over and over. Okay, Councilmember Reamer has moved. Councilmember Navarro has seconded the motion to override the veto. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
No.
Mr. Jawando votes no. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Friedson, I couldn't hear you.
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Mr. Albernos?
Yes.
Mr. Albernos votes yes. And Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'd like to move item 10 up and out of order before item 9 for a better flow of the meeting. That's okay with everyone. This is the introduction of a resolution to support changes to state legislation enabling the creation of business improvement districts in Montgomery County. Now that that has been introduced, is there a motion to suspend the rules and act on this resolution today?
So moved.
Councilmember Glass moves. Is there a second? Councilmember Rice seconds. Let me call on the author, Councilmember Glass, to explain the resolution.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I appreciate all of my colleagues who have co-sponsored the resolution. I don't think we need to go into too much depth since we just had a very thoughtful and honest conversation about the business improvement district. But this, in short, this resolution is just a way for the council to signify our true commitment to working with the District 20 and any other state lawmakers, a District 20 delegation and any other state lawmakers who want to improve upon the statewide business improvement district legislation to continue making it more fair and more equitable, more cognizant and of economic situations and equity. And so I'll stop there. But again, this is just a signal of our sincere interest in working with state lawmakers to do what we all know should be done. So thank you.
Oops, okay, sorry, Mr. Katz, I missed you earlier. Okay, Councilmember Jawando with a question for staff. Sorry.
That's all right. Mr. Drummer, just it's relevant to this resolution too. The part of the memo on page, what page is that? I don't know. Your memo for today, it doesn't have a page number on it, but where you're talking about the District 20 delegation letter, which this resolution is in reference to, kind of signaling that the sense of the council that we'd like to see some changes. They were very specific in what they're going to be pursuing. the requirement that 65% of tenant businesses have to express an interest to establish the bid, raising from 51% to 65% the number of property parcels and property values, increasing the membership of the board from 9 to 15, and removing the statutory definition of bid membership, which currently is only defined as owners of property, non-exempt property. That's why residents can't be a part of it and the like. Those things, if they were to, any combination were to change, obviously we don't know what would happen, but you said the council would have to amend Bill 321 for future bids, right? So bids in other parts of the county that might occur or form to conform to the act. But the existing bid that has just been overridden and allows to be moved forward in Silver Spring would have been legally approved under the original enabling act. So could you explain that? Because it's, my understanding of that is, for example, if say the provision of 65% of the businesses had to assent, that would not have been required because that wasn't a requirement when this bid was established in Silver Spring. Am I reading that correctly? Is that your opinion of this? Or would we have to then go back and pass another bill for the Silver Spring and they'd have to start all over the process? What are you saying?
First, we don't have any state legislation in front of us to actually give you an opinion on that. It depends on how, logically, it wouldn't affect the existing bid unless the state legislature decided to come in and strike the bid down, in which case you have potential legal issues.
Right. Okay.
But it doesn't, but the bid, that is authorized by Bill 321 requires future steps to fund, and also is something that gets revisited every 3 years. So whether this bid could ultimately be changed, the requirements could be changed in the future, that's possible, but it's unlikely that the state legislature, I would think, is planning to enact a bill that's going to strike down the bid that was lawfully enacted under the prior the prior state law. I think it would still exist, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't change in the future, and it doesn't mean that the big corporation couldn't agree to make changes and then the council, approve it that way. It's a little speculative as to what would happen.
Right. Sure.
I don't think. It wouldn't automatically strike down what's.
That was my reading. That was my reading of it as well, is that the bid that was passed would stay in place unless something was changed. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Bob, I would think your legal advice I would stay away from speculating. We conform local legislation, tell me if I'm wrong, to state legislation all the time. And we're right now updating our public safety law to conform to, for example, the Police Accountability Act, which was passed at the state level. And we have more work to do in that area. And we had to do that with 5G. We've had to do that with a number of other bills every single year because we're constrained by state law. So this county law now was drafted to the past state law, which we all probably think was imperfect. And if the state law is updated, we would have to conform with whatever state law is passed by the assembly in their wisdom in the future. Is that all correct?
Yeah, that's all correct. I think Mr. Giwanda was asking about how would that affect the existing bid, not
that would be speculating. All we know is we would have to conform to whatever state law the state assembly passes, right?
Absolutely, right.
Okay, so we have this resolution in front of us. Councilmember Glass has moved. Councilmember Rice has seconded it.
Can I just say that the only motion that was made was to suspend the rules. You could do it in one motion, suspend the rules and approve it, or you could do it separately. But so far, there's only been a motion to suspend the rules.
Okay.
I would like you're looking for that. I'd like to motion to suspend the rules and vote on this resolution.
Councilmember Rice, down with that too. Okay, all those in favor of suspending the rules and approving this resolution, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Great. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks, Mr. Drummer. Now we go back into legislative session for item 9. We will now take up the introduction of Expedited Bill 3421, Personnel and Human Resources, COVID-19 Vaccination Required. A public hearing is scheduled for October 19th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m. Ms. Wellens, are you with us? Ms. Reamer, you want to jump in? You were
Yes,
waving. Are you waving?
I'm here. Sorry for the delay.
No worries.
Can we ask Ms. Wellens to walk through the bill for us?
Certainly. So this bill will, it would require all county employees, regardless of their status as union representative and their merit system status, require them to obtain vaccinations against COVID-19. The nuts and bolts are that the employee would have 7 days after notification from the employer to provide proof of vaccination or to apply for a medical accommodation in an instance in which an employee's health would preclude them from getting the vaccine. Then the bill goes on to lay out a process in which an employee who failed to comply would be placed on unpaid leave for 7 days. They would have another opportunity then to show that they had obtained an initial dose of the vaccine or to apply for the medical accommodation. And then presumably the employee could either come back and or get the accommodation. If for employees who fail to comply with all of those provisions, the ultimate result would be dismissal from employment. And the bill does exempt its requirements and its implementation from collective bargaining. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer.
All right. Thank you, Council President. I want to start by thanking Councilmember Jawando. We talked about this issue in council session a couple weeks ago, and we discussed the importance of closing this gap of vaccination rates among our county employees. And I want to thank Councilmember Jawando for joining with me in this, because I know it's not easy, but our employees need us to stand up for them right now. And there are many of our employees who are going to work every day, and they know that they're side by side with somebody who's refusing to take the vaccinations. And for whatever reason, well, in any event, they're working side by side with people who are refusing to take the vaccinations. We have members of our public who maybe have an accident, a car crash, walk into a county facility. I think they might assume that the county officials that they interact with are vaccinated. Come to find out, a number of them are not. And that's a real problem. This pandemic relies upon unvaccinated people. That is how it keeps going. And we're also seeing breakthrough cases among vaccinated people. But the real logs in this fire are people who are unvaccinated. And when you're unvaccinated, you put those around you at risk. I cannot conclude anything other than refusing to take the vaccination as a political statement. And what we're seeing from those who refuse to get vaccinated and then get sick is they urgently demand every kind of therapy and treatment that they can get their hands on. And they expect that the county insurance will pay for it. Why should our employees who go ahead and get vaccinated have to pay for the excessive healthcare costs of those who refuse? It's just not right. And we have let the executive take his course of action with a testing requirement. And unfortunately, we are not seeing good results. So if the county executive and the county employee unions can get that vaccination number up to a level that means we don't need to enact a mandate, fine. But we're seeing no evidence of that. What we're seeing is rates of vaccination that are dramatically lower than the county population. So, any company, if I worked for any company, I would want that company to have a vaccination requirement. I would, as an employee, prefer that. I would feel more comfortable with that. And of course, if I have to report in person, I would want that. So while I acknowledge that this is creating some concern, in various quarters, I really have to believe that there are far more county employees who are happy that we would consider this and who will be urging us to pass it than those who are opposed to it. And so we have this legislation being introduced now. There, as the council president said, there will be a public hearing on October 19th. And I'm not sure if we can act on it that day, but if we can, we probably should. I want to add, I think it should also apply to volunteers, volunteer firefighters, and contractors. I think we want those who work for us to protect themselves, protect their coworkers, and protect the public. So thank you very much for your consideration as we proceed through this. I know the council has taken many bold actions over the course of this pandemic to promote public health. And again, I think there are thousands of county employees who need our support here as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Councilmember Reamer. It's glad to work with you on this. It's not as you said, it's not an easy thing to do. It's not something that when you put a mandate out, you realize it has consequences, but it's an important and it's the right thing to do. I think you're exactly right. I think most residents, when you would be surprised to hear that, if some of the recent numbers that 62% of our firefighters are vaccinated. That means 38% roughly or so aren't. And they shouldn't have to question whether the one that responds and risks their life to come save their life is potentially exposing them to COVID. It just shouldn't be at any number. That just shouldn't be something that we have to deal with. You also bring up the important point about employees working in workplaces in close quarters, which is, I think, a significant issue as well, and not knowing. This is the right thing to do. We have taken a measured approach. We've erred on the side of caution throughout the pandemic, and the numbers have kind of plateaued. I was talking to the director of our library system yesterday, which has, I think, the highest vaccination rate of any county department, and they tend to have older employees, and they're up close to like 97, 98%. And it's important that our county residents have confidence and our county employees have confidence that their colleagues are vaccinated. This is not, the other thing I wanted to set was context. While it's a difficult decision, we're not alone in this. By November 22nd, every federal government employee has to be vaccinated or risk being terminated as well after a series, absent some sort of medical exemption, which we have provided for here. The state of Massachusetts, by October 17th, every government employee has to be vaccinated in the entire state. This is not some sort of extreme or rash action. It is a public health action to keep residents and employees of our county who work very hard to keep them safe so that they can continue doing that on behalf of our residents. I'm a big proponent of our county workforce, and I don't take this step lightly, but it's something we need to do. And some of the lowest vaccination rates are in the public safety sector, where you're more likely to interact with other people and in bodily fluids and other things, which is just another reason, on top of just general leading by example, to do this. You know, we have one of the greatest vaccination rates in the nation. We need to be modeling that behavior in the county government. I think it's what our residents expect. Hope that we can get this passed as well. I would agree with you that we should have the public hearing and try to do it as soon as possible so that we can start sending the message that everyone should get vaccinated. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Council Vice President Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this year I'm celebrating my 15th year working for this government. And it has been the honor of a lifetime working side by side with our unbelievably dedicated public employees who have put their lives on the line over these last year and a half, who've sacrificed more than any of us can imagine, who've worked tirelessly prior to the pandemic to provide critical services to our most vulnerable residents. And working in public service means something. It's a noble, noble profession. And we have a long tradition, a generational tradition of having among the best public employees that I will take any day of the week and twice on Sunday among all local and national jurisdictions. And I have really appreciated the efforts of our labor leaders, of our public health officials to communicate, to educate, to go literally from job site to job site, making it as easy and as accessible as possible for all of our county employees to receive their vaccination. And their efforts have worked because the vast majority of our county employees have received that vaccination. But unfortunately, as is indicative of our entire country, there's a small percentage, particularly here in our community, that still have not. And I believe it's our responsibility as legislators and the county executives as well to protect the health of our entire community, all of our county employees, and not the very small percentage through some combination of fear, stubbornness, misinformation, political ideology, or maybe just plain laziness, have not yet decided to sign up for a vaccination whose efficacy is absolutely unquestioned at this point. A vaccination that's saving lives, a vaccination that's protecting my kids, 3 of which who are not yet eligible to receive the vaccination, and ensure their overall health. The least we can do is ensure that our public officials and our public servants are adhering to the unquestioned science of what we need to do to ensure the safety of they themselves, their families, their neighbors, their loved ones, their coworkers, and our entire community at large. I get very frustrated, and I've just had it at this point with people who are holding out for God knows what reason. But we have to take steps forward to ensure the safety and security, as we have done every single step of the way since the beginning of this pandemic. So I will support this bill. I support this legislation to protect all of our residents, to protect our employees, and frankly, to protect that small percentage of employee who, for whatever reason, continues to decide not to take something that everyone acknowledges, who's a professional and who has done research, is the right thing to do. So I'm impassioned about this, and I appreciate the sponsors moving it forward. I'd like to be listed as a co-sponsor, and I yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Council Vice President. So that bill is now introduced. Next, we have a proposed closed session to discuss public security, including the deployment of fire and police services and staff, the development and implementation of emergency plans pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions Article 3305B10. The topic is ongoing investigation of criminal activity and police deployment and tactics. Is there a motion to enter a closed session?
So move.
Chairman Katz moves and Councilmember Navarro seconds. Would those in favor please raise your hands? That is unanimous. We'll see you in closed session. Thank you, everyone.